Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 62. Not Your Mom's Breakfast Club. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the 2017 film, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
Nothing new in my writing world. It's just the same slow progress on editing. That's about it. How about you?
Progress on finishing up this book, progress on the audiobooks. It's just, I'm actually really yearning to be finished on both. I have to figure out how I'm going to celebrate.
Yeah, that'll be great.
How do you celebrate when you finish a book?
I don't. Not really. For me, it's always just a relief. Like, oh, okay. Because it's always like there's another phase to do, right? So I'll finish the first draft, and it's like, okay, good. I got the first draft out, but I know in my mind there's like so much stuff I have to go back and fix, and I have to tweak, and I have to get feedback from other people, and then I have to go through another editing process. And then even when it's like I've done the final draft, then it's like, okay, now I got to do the publishing process. It's like all these steps, and then by the time it actually goes up and goes live, it's just like, okay, phew. Everything went through. I think it's okay. Moving on to the next one. And that's kind of how it was when I would finish video games too. Whenever we completed a game, it's just there's so much work involved and there's so many bugs you're trying to fix at the end that by the time it goes out, it's just like, oh, okay. I just like collapse and like, okay, now I can breathe for a bit. So I usually don't do celebration.
Your celebration is a sigh of relief.
That's pretty much it. I should have something better, but nothing right now. How about you? Do you have a celebration?
I don't, but I'm thinking I would like to start because finishing a book is a big deal. I mean, I don't know how true this is because this is not a number that I have researched. So with the caveat, this is what I've heard, quote unquote, knowing that hearing things can sometimes be completely wrong. But I've heard that only 3% of the people who start a book finish a book.
That sounds reasonable.
And so I think it's something to celebrate. You know, having finished a book because it's not that people aren't determined enough or they haven't persevered enough. It's because finishing a book is hard. And it's a skill that requires time and effort to do. And sometimes people realize maybe this isn't what they thought they wanted to do. And so they decide it's not for them, or they're not quite sure they haven't figured out how they want to finish it yet. So it's taking longer than they expect. So I think if you finish a book, or if I finish a book, that is something worth celebrating because it was a hard slog getting there. And I would want to celebrate everyone who does it. Because it is hard.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's like, regardless of the output of the book, right? Yeah. Whether you like it, you don't like it, you think it's amazing, you don't think it's amazing, whatever. I still respect someone who can just go through the process, sit down, and write a book from start to finish. It's not an easy thing to do.
It's not.
I mean, I'm hoping it gets easier as I get more books done. But it's still, even though I've refined my process a bit, it's still a challenge. and it's a lot of work. And then especially if you go through the process of editing it, and then again, even more respect if you go through the process of getting a cover done and doing all the things that are necessary for getting the book published and actually getting it out there into the world. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
I agree. So I would like to incorporate that into my sort of overall process, is celebrating when the book is done, because no matter how long it takes, and it may take a long time, and I have actually started to go slower, because as my craft has improved and I want to produce a better product, I spend a lot more time on it now than I used to. My freshman foray into writing, which is the time travel series, which is a fine series. You know, I think it's a good start, but that one didn't take me as long. This one's taking me longer because I really want to produce a good product. It's like running a marathon. If it takes you twice as long or three times as long as, you know, the people who have been doing it for years and have developed the skill set as a beginner or an intermediate skilled person, no matter how long it takes you to get to the end, celebrate getting to the end. I think that's what I want to do. So I haven't figured out how yet. Usually my celebrations involve food.
Yeah. Yeah, a friend of mine suggested, you should have a launch party when the book comes out. I was like, well, it seems kind of weird. It's like, hey, it's a launch party, celebrate me. Like, that's, I don't know, it feels odd.
In the meantime, as a reminder to our listeners, if you want to read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written, which is my science fiction series, you can find that on Patreon. And the first book in the Tales of Zara is on Amazon in both episodic format on Kindle Vella, as well as ebook and paperback. And all the links for those ongoing projects, our creative output, are in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books or movies or television?
I just watched the TV series Resident Alien. Have you seen
my
or heard about
offspring has been watching that. What do you think?
I love it. It's a lot of fun. I really like Alan Tudyk, or however you say his name. He just does such a great job as the alien character. His facial expressions and the way he talks are just hilarious. And it's a cool story. It's got some heart in there. It's got some interesting plot twists, some really fun characters. I'm really enjoying it. I hope they do another season.
I'll have to ask my offspring, because I just knew that it was being watched. I don't know what the opinion is.
So what about you? What have you been watching or reading?
Just going through one episode at a time of Foundation. I'm still really enjoying that. One thing I encountered in season 2, which doesn't make sense to me, and I'll be really interested in discussing that with you when we talk about Foundation. We've put that on the calendar for those who are interested in hearing us talk about Foundation. That is now on the podcast calendar for May, I think. And so we'll be talking about it then. And so other than that, though, I think it's been a really tight story, and it's well done, and really interesting twists and turns. The story is laid out that this is what this is about, and then all of a sudden it changes, and no, it's actually about this. Well, no, actually it's a little bit about this. So I've been really enjoying that too. And it feels, the changes and the twists and the turns have felt very organic and natural and interesting. And I just think it's a well done show.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Are you ready to talk about Jumanji?
I am.
All right, let's begin. Today we're talking about the story told in the 2017 film Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. And I'm going to read the synopsis that comes up when you type Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle on Google. 4 high school kids discover an old video game console and are drawn into the game's jungle setting, literally becoming the adult avatars they chose. What they discover is that you don't just play Jumanji, you must survive it. To beat the game and return to the real world, they'll have to go on the most dangerous adventures of their lives, discover what Alan Parrish left 20 years before, and change the way they think about themselves, or they'll be stuck in the game forever. Did you enjoy this movie?
Yeah, I love this movie. Really fun. I liked the original Jumanji too, back in the day with Robin Williams. I thought that was fun also. And I think they did a great twist on it by bringing it into the modern world and making it a video game that they go into. I thought that was really fun. And I like how they connect to the previous movie by having the board game convert to a video game.
Yeah.
So we see it's like this magical thing that changes over time and adapts. Yeah. And I thought it was just so well done. They just get into the story very quickly. The pacing is great. They do a quick setup of the characters in the real world and then throw them into this situation, right? It's the Breakfast Club or whatever where they're all in detention. And then, boom, they're off onto their adventure. It's so lean and tight. They do such a great job of setting up the characters, the issues they're facing with, the flaws they might have. And then we get to see how that's going to change over the course of the story. Each of the characters, when they go into the game world, we see that they need to improve themselves in some way. You've got the nervous, fearful pushover, weakling guy that has to become the strong, fearless leader of the group. And then the tough football player, the big guy, gets thrown into the opposite world where now he's short and a weakling, and his strength is, pulling stuff out of a backpack, which is great. The girl who's not necessarily interested in, fun or physical activity, but then she has to become the dance fighter. And you've got the narcissistic hot girl, right, who becomes the fat older guy whose strengths are all intellectual pursuits. It was really fun the way they set him up, and then they turn that on its head once they're in the other world. And this isn't necessarily writing or story related, but the actors just pull it off so well. Like every single one of them just makes the story come alive. It makes it just so much fun. I mean, Jack Black is just amazing in this role, but all of them do a great job. Yeah, and I love what they do with their characterization and how they interact with each other as they're changed and how they kind of push each other to grow. And then they end up gelling as a group at the end, having gone through this crazy adventure. I like how they all have a part to play. Person there is integral, not just even their first four who go in, but obviously the guy that they meet later, who's actually there before them, obviously. Everyone has a part. And that's also very video gamey, right? In addition, but it's good storytelling, right? Why do you have your characters in there if they're not going to be significant, especially if they're in like a major role? So I thought they did that phenomenally well. Another thing that I think doesn't get appreciated a lot of times is I like how they had a proper falling action after the climax and a resolution scene where we get to see them in their other world, back in their normal world, I should say. And we get to see how they've changed. But they do a good job here. It's not just, the characters have done a 180. We show that they're improved, but they're not entirely new people. They still have some, things they're working on. So it feels a little bit more realistic. Because a lot of times you get movies where the climax happens and then it's like the end. And you don't get this.
Yeah.
You don't get a resolution. You don't get a denouement. You don't get the seeing them back in their life, right? How this has affected them. We don't get to see they've grown and how they're now interacting with other people again. So it's nice. It's nice that they brought that around full circle in the story. And I think they did it really well and realistically. Yeah. But yeah, to me, this is just a really fun, very tight movie. I think they knocked it out of the park trying to. This is how you do a remake of an earlier story. And it's not exactly a remake. It's just taking the concept and doing something new with it. But they did that very well, in my opinion. I thought it was great. Did you like this movie?
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. And I think what I really enjoyed the most about it, I agree with everything that you said about this film. I think what I really liked about it, it was less menacing. The first was seriously menacing. I mean, the things that were happening in the Jumanji game were happening in the real world, right? I mean, the town was being overrun by rhinoceroses and elephants and evil monkeys. So, and they were,
Right.
everything that was happening in the game was happening to innocent bystanders. So it actually felt almost a little bit sort of like a light horror story in a way, even to the point of at the end of the original Jumanji with Robin Williams, the Kirsten Dunst character died. She was, shot by the poison spines and, dies at the end. This was much lighter in tone, and it made it more fun. And it was all in the universe of the video game, so it was not out in the real world, which then made it feel a little safer. And I got to say, I enjoyed that. There was still a little bit of pathos with regard to the young man who was pulled in earlier, that they sort of rescued and even sacrificed themselves for, because they had those extra lives, as you do in a video game. The discovery that he had been in the game for 20 years or however long it was, that was, very disturbing to him. And so you had sort of that, still the same feeling that you got with Alan Parrish as he came out of the game as an adult. You have the same sort of feeling of the time lost and the stakes of, if you get stuck in the game, you're here forever. I thought that was really well done. I loved the ensemble element. And I think in the original movie, it really wasn't as much of an ensemble group. It was Robin Williams sort of took the lead because he had spent however long he had spent in the jungle in Jumanji, but it didn't seem like they were all working together as much as it did here. It seemed like everybody was more working together than there. And I also really enjoyed, like you said, everybody had an arc in this story, and every character had a need that was clearly presented at the very beginning. And it wasn't, we've talked about before when we watch movies, sometimes a character's arc is stated at the very beginning by someone that then reflects, this is what you need, and the character says, no, I don't. And then that's the journey that the character goes on. Here we didn't actually see that verbally stated, but it was very identifiable by the viewer from moment one, by the character themselves, by their actions, by the things that they said. We just saw it right away. Basic stuff, especially when you're dealing with, teenagers in high school. I too had the Breakfast Club thought, especially as we moved into the game, right? And they start talking about their issues.
Yeah.
That was very Breakfast Clubby. The girls talking about, well, maybe you're just nervous about this. Well, maybe you feel insecure about that. It's very Breakfast Clubby. Jack Black helping Roundhouse. That was, I think, her name. Like Roundhouse.
Yeah, Ruby Roundhouse.
Teaching Ruby how to flirt and move. It was very much like in the Breakfast Club when the Molly Ringwald character helped the other one like wear makeup and get her hair out of her eyes. It was just funny.
Yeah.
And I also, like I usually do when I'm looking at an ensemble story, is that each character adds to the success. They would not have succeeded without every character doing something. Just like you said, about how they all have their role, they all have their strengths as defined by the game, and they all figured out how to use them so that it was a collaborative process getting themselves out of it. So fun movie.
I really liked everything you said as well, and also just the video game aspects of it. I think they did they made it feel video gamey just enough, without overloading the story. Like having the multiple lives, having them have like a skill set display that pops up in the world, the cinematic cutscene, the NPC characters. Yeah. I think they integrated that very well. And I think something you mentioned about with the Kirsten Dunst character dying, it was in this one, they allowed the characters to die, but they made it fun. They played with it, and you see that they have 3 lives. So it's like, okay, we can still do that. But then, there's still the countdown for each of them where it's like they all get down to 1 by the end of it. So then you start to feel like, okay, yeah, then it's like it's serious now. So they kind of got both, right? They got to play with it and also have some meaning at the end. I really like the way they set that up as well.
I agree.
As far as what I would improve, it's really hard. There's so much they did well here. The only thing I really thought of, like on a high level anyway, was I would have liked to have seen the actual climactic moment do the thing that I talk about a lot on here, where there's like a pivotal moment where the character does something very specific that shows that they've overcome their flaw or their wound. You know, they've achieved what they need, whatever it is. And like that's a very specific moment that's represented at the very climactic moment. And this wasn't really that. They kind of they did do that throughout the final act and during the climactic sequence, but there wasn't that one particular moment. But that's a really small complaint because I think overall they did it very well, and we get to see that the characters grew and changed and learned to work together at the end. I thought, it's a small thing. Nothing else really came to mind. I really enjoyed the way that they had their setups and their payoffs. I thought the pacing was really good throughout. A lot of good humor, good action. Maybe I would have had the villain interact with them a little bit more. But again, you know, it's a small thing. Are there any things that you saw that you would improve?
A couple of small things, again, very small, because this is such a fun movie and it just doesn't matter about these little things. So just for argument's sake, I would have liked to have seen them destroy the game as soon as they came back into the basement that they were cleaning. It seemed like they waited the whole weekend to destroy the game.
That's true.
And I would have been like, oh, let's just destroy this now. I think that would have made a lot more sense to when they came back and they showed up in the basement. They're like, okay, that needs to go. And then destroyed it then. Small thing, teeny thing. I also would have liked, it felt like it took a little too long for them to gel, considering their circumstances. Yes, they didn't trust each other. Yes, this was making them all uncomfortable and, you know, this was really weird. But I kind of would have thought that when you're in like an extreme situation like that, you come together because we're social animals and that's what we do. Come together, work together. And I would have liked them to started to work together. And then as they started to figure out what the game, then have some of the conflict come out. As they started to relax, okay, we know what we're doing and we know what we have to do, then kind of have the conflict come out. Small thing again. You know, I don't think it would have changed the enjoyment of the movie at all. It's just something I was thinking, wouldn't it have been interesting if they sort of came together and then the conflict popped out because of the difference in personalities. And the other thing I would have liked to have seen is Bridges' arc was not as well defined. And, you know, he was an athlete who was essentially getting somebody else to write his papers for him because he didn't have time for school. But in reality, he probably wasn't making time for school because he was prioritizing the athleticism over the education. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more well-defined acceptance of the value of education. So he was the zoologist of the group, right? And he was solving problems because of the zoology knowledge that his character had. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of an open acknowledgement of him saying, you know what, this knowledge thing is actually kind of valuable and it's worth me doing myself. And again, small thing.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I would have liked to have seen that too. Now that you mentioned that, I think his transformation that he went through was one of sort of taking advantage of his friend, and then he had to become the weak one, but a loyal sidekick. Yeah. So I think they went with that, but you're right. I would have liked to have seen more of that. And also, this goes back to the thing that I mentioned, where in the climax, I would have liked to have seen them each sort of exemplify the lesson that they've learned and put that into a specific moment. Yeah. And we had the opportunity for him when he encounters the elephant, right? He just says stop to the elephant, and the elephant stops, and it's like a little joke about the elephant and the mouse. But I would have liked to that have been something where it was what you said, where something about his knowledge of zoology would have helped him there. Oh, if I do this and that, then I can, you know, convince the elephant or something, you know, something that's a little more specific to the skill set that he supposedly had. And then, like you said, have him value that more. That would have been a great thing to have him come through at the end in the resolution, where we see like him taking his studies more seriously or something like that. Like, oh wait, I can't do that right now because I need to study for the test, or I need to work on this research paper or something. Yeah, that's a good note. I like that.
So what themes did you pull out of Jumanji? And I'm curious, I know what I think the obvious theme was. I'm curious whether you pulled something different than I did.
I think there's a number of things working throughout the story because of the group of people. So I focused it more on Spencer as sort of the main character, the Dwayne Johnson character. But overall, I think as a group, there's certainly an element of learning to work together and respect other people and all of that. I don't necessarily think that's the main theme of the story, though. I think it's more about, if we look at just his character, it's something like you're not going to get what you want in life by being nervous and afraid all of the time. I think that's specific to him, though, and I think there are other elements with the other characters. Maybe you could generalize it more to learning to believe in yourself or overcoming insecurities, things like that, because I think a number of the characters represent insecurities in different ways, and then they have to deal with those and challenge themselves and grow over the course of the story. So that's kind of a vague answer. I gave one specific answer for what I think Spencer's growth is as sort of the representative of the theme, but it feels too specific for me. So did you come up with something as a general theme, or did you have multiple specific themes? What did you get?
I just came up with one general theme, and I went with sort of the ensemble approach. And as influenced by The Breakfast Club, I have don't judge a book by its cover, because each one of these characters were making assumptions about each other based on the exterior personality they were showing to the world.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a good one.
And I think it applies well to, I think the themes that you came up with for the individuals about, insecurity and facing your fears and moving forward when you're insecure, I think it's really good. Also, there's a certain amount of each of them looked at each other and drew conclusions about each other without actually understanding the three-dimensional person beneath the exterior. So I think that's what I pulled from it. Yeah,
that's cool. They're two sides of the same coin, right?
Yes.
Because one is you have these insecurities and how you present yourself.
Yes.
And on the other side, you have how people are viewing you, right?
So what is the takeaway that you get from Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, as a writer?
I had a couple of things. The main one is to treat all of your characters with respect and give each of them a fulfilling avenue of growth, so that they're not just cardboard cutouts, or you're not just using them as props or tools or for situational purposes. Certainly if they're going to be, if it's like this and it's going to be an ensemble story, make sure they each have some depth and they each have room to grow and they each have their own characters and personalities and depth to them. So that's my main one. Another thing that I thought was at the end, like I mentioned before, with the resolution, where we see Spencer come back and he's still a little nervous about talking to the girl and how he's going to handle that. And it shows that it's like the character hasn't done a complete 180, right? He's not Mr. Strong, totally secure, Braveheart or Bravestone, whatever his name was at the end, right? He's still got some of that insecurity, but we see that he's grown. So my takeaway there is your characters don't have to completely change at the end, right? You could still have them, we see some of the growth, but we're not entirely transforming who they were, right? They're not, over the course of one day becoming a whole new person. It's nudging them in a direction. So that's another thing I take away from it. What is your writing takeaway?
I think your takeaways were really good. My takeaway was that character needs don't have to be complicated. Each one of these people essentially had a form of insecurity that they needed to overcome. And it wasn't life-ending trauma. It was just self-doubt. And I think that's something that's important. Sometimes you can make just a really great story out of uncomplicated character needs. So that was what I took away.
Absolutely. That's a great one.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the 2017 film Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the 2005 film, The Island. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.